We will begin with a period of public comments on agenda items. A total of 30 minutes is set aside for public comment at the beginning and again at the end of the meeting. The maximum time allowed for any one speaker is 3 minutes. Public comments at the beginning of the meeting are limited to items on the agenda. Persons who wish to participate in the public comment portion of the meeting must state their name and the specific topic about which they wish to speak. As speakers must limit comments to issues appropriate for public discussion, complaints or compliments about student discipline, specific student issues, or personnel must not be addressed during public comment. Some of you may wonder why you can't say something nice about somebody. We received legal opinion that if we allowed you to say something nice about someone, you could also say something not so nice. So therefore, we're now putting that in just to let everyone know that it's not a matter of personality at this point when we're making public comments. Thank you. Right. Would anyone like to speak? No? Well, then we will move on to board comments and announcements received by the Board of Education. Mr. Lumia?
First of all, I'd like to congratulate the John Jay and Royce Ketchum football teams for their victory. He can't hear me.
Yeah, you can hear me.
So, come on, Mr. Rubin. Again, once again, congratulations to our RCK John Jay football teams for their victories this past weekend. I'd also like to thank one of the students here who gave out each one of us one of these drawings. The student's name is Elizabeth Trigard, period 8 art. I appreciate it. I'm going to hang this up in my downstairs next to my son's drawings.
Other comments?
Oh, yes.
Mr. Rubin.
Thank you. I would like, is this working now?
It's working.
Okay. Well, I had the opportunity to attend the BOCES Board of Education meeting, capital equipment meeting these past 2 weeks. I also met with Dee Dee Barrett at a meet and greet to see a little bit of what she's doing on educational issues for us. I had the pleasure of attending RCK's Informants performance. That's a wonderful thing. Went to visit Evans during an Adopt a School visit, and I'm impressed with that school. As our representative visited, was at the PTA Council. PTA Council held an open meetings law here, forum here. I found that very informative. And I'd also like to mention that on Thursday afternoon here, if anybody likes to donate blood, they're having a little doctor's meeting here, a little doctor's where there's a blood drive here. I'll be there, and I hope to see you. Oh, and the principal here was at the open forums meeting law. So it was very nice. Thank you.
Mrs. Lavelle.
I would just like to thank Dr. McNally and Dr. Schumann and Mrs. Platts. I had the opportunity to visit each of their schools. They were very gracious, professional, and engaging, and I had some excellent conversations and so wonderful things going on at Fishkill Elementary and Brinkerhoff and Van Wyck. And thank you very much.
Well, I actually have a lot to say this time. I also attended the Capital Improvement Committee meeting chaired by Mr. Lumia, and it's great to see all the progress being made on the district's capital project, and the open meetings law and freedom of information meeting. That's why the change in the public comments, what we're letting you know about. And I attended the homecoming game at RCK. Wonderful weather and a great game. And the boys soccer match between John Jay and Ketchum. I was there for the first half. And I would have been there for the girls team also, but I had the wrong time for it. so I missed it. I'm sorry. I'll try to catch the girls another time. All right. The main thing, though, is that I attended the New York State School Boards Association convention in New York City, and I have a report on that. First of all, there were almost 1,600 attendees from around the state, and out of all, terrific, a wonderful, wonderful conference. Out of almost 70 different workshops offered, I attended sessions on improving attendance, reducing the necessity of suspensions, addressing race and gender gaps, using time analysis to raise achievement gaps, and achieving academic excellence within a whole child framework. I have shared this information with Mr. Carrion and his senior staff, and I will be glad to discuss them in depth with any members of the board or the public. I also attended a panel discussion addressing our standardized tests valid measures of student achievement and teacher performance with the following people on the panel. Panel. Regents Chancellor Merrill Tisch, the Executive Director of the New York State Council of School Superintendents, the Executive Administrator of the New York State PTA, the President of the New York State United Teachers, the Deputy Chancellor of New York City Department of Education, and the Superintendent of Poughkeepsie City School District. They all raised many concerns with the current tests, especially the representatives of the PTA, the teachers, and the superintendents, who, of course, have more direct contact with the tests. Which is interesting because then it led into the business meeting, which lasted almost 4 hours Tuesday morning. Okay. All right. I voted in accordance with the Wappinger School Board's wishes. In the one case, a tie, I changed my personal vote after having heard floor discussion, and that broke the tie. The proposed resolutions have been previously posted online. The approved resolutions provide direction for New York State School Boards Association in lobbying state legislators and other state officials on behalf of the school boards of New York State. The results are shown here. Do we have that? I'm going to put it up for you. Okay. Yes. All right. There you see the way your school board members voted, wanted me to vote, and if you look up where all the proposed resolutions are listed, which we went over at the previous school board meeting, you will find the complete text. I just wanted to point out now, since you can get all the other information, the details online, the things that were changed significantly. Resolution 2 was approved as amended, and I'm going to read to you how it was amended to read. Resolved that the New York State School Boards Association shall advocate for an overhaul of the current inadequate testing system to more accurately measure achievement in skills, knowledge, and abilities, and it shall do this by A, working collaboratively with the New York State Board of Regents and the New York State Department of Education to create tests that are developmentally appropriate, of reasonable length and frequency, and which avoid the unintended consequences of narrowing the curriculum, teaching to the test, reducing love of learning, and undermining school climate. B, insisting that boards of education, superintendents, principals, and teachers throughout the state be included in all aspects of the creation of standardized tests. And C, demanding that district personnel be permitted to examine test results, answer keys, and their students' responses so that educators can better assess what each child is learning in relation to what is being taught, and so that such tests can truly inform instruction. Right? Of the other ones that were amended, they were only slight amendments. On Resolution 16, which talked about making advanced placement and international baccalaureate courses available to districts, small districts. They suggested online instruction and added or under BOCES if districts prefer that. And number 18, which was also modified, was talking about technical and career programs and added that they be industry approved so that students who take these courses would then be able to get a job in the field in which they had studied. The resolutions 25, 26, and 28 were withdrawn because what they covered was already included in the amended resolution number 2 that I read to you a moment ago. And resolutions 29 and 30, by then it was almost 4 hours and people had left to catch planes and trains, and so there was no quorum, so they were never brought up. Okay. If anyone has any questions or would like me to go into more detail on any aspect of the convention, I'll be happy to do so now. Okay. Then we can move right along to the superintendent's report. Mr. Carrion.
Good evening, Madam President, Board of Education. We have a huge crowd here today. First and foremost, I always want to commend the students that are here. And we know why you're here. And before you know it, you will be walking across that stage. And that's one of the greatest feelings. So continue to do great work, continue to excel, so that you can have an incredible 12th grade senior year experience. Thank you for being here this evening. In addition, we have many of our colleagues, our teachers that are here today, and they're also here, and I believe that our president will let us know why, because they're here to recognize the Board of Education, so they're part of my superintendent's report. Before we go into the second part of my superintendent's report, I just want to make clear to the public, to the Board of Education, that at the last weekly memo review, Commissioner Elliott put out a survey for anyone in New York State to fill out regarding their views on the region's reform agenda. Many times we hear many of our community members coming up to the microphone. We have conversations, dialogue, whether personal dialogues, whether sitting with our colleagues at school or in the district. But this is a time for you to actually participate, and whatever it is your concerns or whatever it is that you feel you need to convey, this is an opportunity for everyone in our community to take that survey and convey your thoughts, your recommendations, your opinion. Wanted to share that with everyone. So now we're going to commend the Board of Education. And
by the way, that survey is relatively easy to navigate.
Trustee Rubin just said that survey is relatively easy to navigate. So
And if I can do it.
He can do it.
if he can do it, we can all do it. Now it's time to recognize the board, and I will read the proclamation from the state of New York. Whereas each year, School Board Recognition Week is observed by more than 700 school boards and school districts throughout the Empire State, and whereas the men and women serving as members of school boards are dedicated to children, learning, and community, and devote many hours of service to elementary and secondary public education as they continually strive for improvement, excellence, and progress in education. And whereas the members of New York's local school boards respond to the educational needs of the communities they serve, and in doing so, these leaders help strengthen our state's educational system and improve future prospects for our children. And whereas during October 26th to 30th, 2015, special activities and programs will be held in communities across New York State in observance of School Board Recognition Week, and it is fitting to join in acknowledging the commitment and contribution of members of local school boards. Now therefore, I, Andrew M. Cuomo, Governor of the State of New York, do hereby proclaim October 26th to the 30th as School Board Recognition Week. With that said, the Wappinger Central School District wants to take this opportunity and thank you for your commitment to serve our students and our community. This is voluntary, and this work is definitely cumbersome, and it takes a lot of commitment and passion and having a belief system for what it is that you believe in. And I just want to take this opportunity on behalf of the entire Wappinger Central School District family to thank each and every one of you. All of our 15 schools participated in providing each one of you with a gift. In front of the dais, we have a bag full of gifts for each and every one of you. Thank you once again. Excuse me? Where's the money? It's not coming. So we'd like to take this opportunity, but before we distribute the gifts, as part of your gift, you will also receive a pin from us and a certificate thanking you for your service to our community. And one last thing, we have our president, Mr. Pasquale Pellicaprini, who's going to come and also provide you with a gift from the WCT.
Good evening, ladies and gentlemen.
Before she tendered her resignation.
My name is Pasquale Pellicaprini. Is it on?
We can all hear you, Pasquale.
My name is Pasquale Pellicaprini. I'm a Wappingers resident, teacher, and for the past 12 years, I've been privileged to represent the Wappingers Congress of Teachers as their president. Tonight, we, as educators, are here to join the New York State Executive Chamber and to recognize and appreciate the Wappinger Central School District Board of Education as this week is dedicated to you. At times when people come to the microphone, become demanding, a sense of entitlement, at the very best difference of opinion. But we must recognize that your job is a difficult one. You are forced with the arduous task of making financial and educational decisions that are necessary and at times criticized and not appreciated. You don't run for the board for financial rewards or accolades. You do it to serve your school community with conviction and fortitude. Therefore, we took the liberty to personalize the proclamation to you, Wappinger Central School Board of Education. Proclamation. Whereas each year, School Board Recognition Week is observed by more than 700 school boards in school districts throughout New York State. And whereas the men and women serving as board members of the Wappinger Central School District are educational leaders dedicated to our students. They devote many hours of service to our elementary and secondary schools as they continually strive for progress and excellence in education. And whereas the members of the Wappinger Central School District Board respond to the educational needs of the community, and they serve, and in doing so, these leaders help strengthen our educational system. Whereas during October 26th through the 30th, 2015, in observance of the New York State School Board Recognition Week, the Wappingers Congress of Teachers would like to join in acknowledging the commitment and the contribution of these dedicated educational leaders. Therefore, I, Pasquale Deli Carpini, President of the Wappingers Congress of Teachers, representing over 900 members, do hereby recognize and celebrate, as proclaimed by the New York State Executive Chamber, October 26 to the 30th, 2015, as School Board Recognition Week. Now, I would like to invite all to rise and recognize our Board of Education by applauding. Please let's do so. I would like to thank everyone for attending. I would also like to clarify that unlike the governor's proclamation, we really mean it. And notice that his proclamation came on a little piece of paper. Ours came, it's written on paper of papiro, carta di papiro, that was very famous in Sicily, that was brought back by Trustee Lumia, and this is the gift that I would like to present to Madam President Peggy Kelly.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
You want to put that on the screen, right?
Yes, that's
Thank you. You can proceed.
okay. Well, that was very nice. Thank you, everyone, on behalf of the board. See, that was a good board meeting to come to, right? It's too bad a couple of people couldn't make it. All right, next, item 601, the fund balance management. Mrs. Crandall?
If I can just say
Oh, yes. Mr. Carrion.
something. Mrs. Crandall and I, we thought it best to actually provide this page so that it can facilitate the conversation and keep it structured in terms of looking at the fund balance and the management of the fund balance, which was requested by the Board of Education in previous meeting. Ms. Crandall?
Can you guys hear me? Can you hear me okay? Hello? Now can you hear me?
Yes. It's not as loud. If it's okay with the board, can she join us at the dais? Join us at the dais.
Good evening, everyone. Can you hear me now?
I think you just have to
Speak
project
into it.
I have to project my voice. Okay, I can do that. Okay, so thank you very much for taking the time this evening to have this conversation about the potential for some fund balance management as a result of the 2014-15 audit for the external financial statements. So a meeting or two ago, we had a presentation from the external auditors that included the financial statements, and it also included some information about how we have fund balance in excess of 4%. This is the first time that Wappinger Central School District has had this concern, and so we have to write a corrective action plan on how we will be handling this matter. So we prepared some information for you to advise as to what the status was. There is no action that could be taken, some action could be taken, and that's what this slide behind us does represent this evening. An option, and that has been discussed at many of our budget presentations, was the creation of reserves and the opportunity for the district to find some financial stability in the creation of these reserves. Information has been shared with the Board of Education as to what the nature of these reserves are, as well as some options that do not include the creation of reserves for discussion this evening.
Are there any questions? Mr. Lumia?
One of the options, obviously, is to utilize the fund to reduce the budget for next year. What are the consequences of us using that money to reduce the budget for next year's budget?
Sure. One of the options that is presented above is to reduce the 16-17 budget by the amount of excess over the 4%. When you infuse a budget process with a one-time cash supply, you look at a deficit in the following year to be made up. Now, when I say deficit, I don't mean in the red. I just mean that you have that one-time cash that was used to fund that budget that is still needed in the next year. You will have to make that up. And with a tax cap, that's incredibly difficult to do.
It seems to me that one of the options that I think should be looked into is to create a reserve fund, possibly. Secondly, being a chairman of the Capital Improvement Committee, there's a lot of projects that require immediate attention. So some of that money could be put to good use. For example, a new roof at Evans, which I think in excess of $600,000. So I think we should identify projects which have to be addressed. They're in critical need, and that money should be used for those things. Secondly, I don't know whether we can use that money for tech certs. I realize that we don't have any tech certs now, but in the past we've had many tech certs that we simply did not have the money. So perhaps we can put some away, if it's legal, to put that in tech certs.
There are several types of reserve funds that can be created. Some are through general municipal law, some are through our educational law. There are several types. There are several types of reserves. So by their nature, some are very specific, some are more broad. Some of the options do not apply to Wappingers as we don't have or find ourselves in situations where we're selling a building or we have an uninsured. We have an insurance where it's a self-funded plan. We don't find ourselves in those situations. But there's also reserves that can be created by the voters or that can be created by the board. There are reserves that only can be spent with approval from the voters. There are reserves that funds have to be returned back after the 4th year, for example. So there are many opportunities. But again, as we've learned, words mean a lot. So if we're creating these reserves, we want to make sure we're creating them with the correct parameters. Certain reserves are very, very specific, and if you try to go outside of the parameters, you will not be allowed to utilize those funds.
I think it's important that we identify those reserves that the board can actually put away, as opposed to get board approval for it. But again, reiterate, there are critical things that have to be addressed by the capital improvements. I think those have to be identified, and some of these funds should go directly into that. Returning money to the taxpayer, I think it's a great idea, but unfortunately, as you just stated, that's going to create a problem for next year's budget. So I think it's silly for us to just say, okay, let's give it back and create problems later on. So I think the options I addressed that should be looked at by the board.
Mr. Rubin?
Thank you. So, correct me, if we were to vote to put these 4%, by the way, how much money are we talking about?
Approximately $2.2 million.
So if we were to vote to put this into reserve funds, we could also then decide at a later point how to distribute, how to apportion those funds?
It would require, depending on the reserve, it would require Board of Education approval or a public hearing or voter approval to actually spend those funds.
But we could do that later on, if we decide to go with this, put it all into the reserve funds.
To create the reserve, we would have to have a specific resolution from the Board of Education. As I stated, I do have to write a corrective action plan to New York State with regard to the excess funds that are available at this time. And I'm sure that I could write it generically with more details to follow, and if the State Comptroller's Office followed up. But I would really believe that I would question doing that and trying to make the best decision possible at this time. Now, please note, one thing I didn't add in discussion of the reserve funds is that the Board of Education also can at any time end the term of those reserve funds. Or they need to get voter approval, or they have a life of their own, in that they have a term where they run out. So there is also the board's opportunity to change or alter the level of funding that are in these reserves. The money can be moved accordingly through Board of Education resolution for those that would allow for it.
Mrs. Pelton.
At what date do you have to have the corrective action plan?
I have to have the corrective action plan prepared by the second week in December. So this gives us a month to discuss.
And with capital improvements, would a reserve fund be necessary, or how would that be?
One of the trustees did ask a very similar question this weekend that we responded via email to. Capital projects take a lengthy amount of time to be approved by New York State. That's the process at facilities planning. So we would need to have the project defined by the architects. We would then have it go to New York State. It could take a very long time. If we were to not reserve the funds, we would not be in compliance for the 15-16 year.
So you do need to, it's better to use the reserve fund.
It is better to reserve because the money has been earmarked at that point in time. It's not sitting in the fund balance and allowing for the district to be out of compliance.
All right, thank you.
You're welcome.
Mrs. Callahan.
Mrs. Crandall, when was the last situation that we had where we were lucky enough to be in
I've been with the district since 1999. I do not remember having this
So we have
conversation.
no history or precedent on this and how it worked. What's your recommendation right now? Or would we want to discuss this at a later meeting?
Yes, I think this needs to be a continued conversation. As I think Mr. Lumia alluded to as well, we have a 5-year building condition survey that we need to look at and address some pertinent matters. The Capital Improvement Committee, which Mr. Lumia and Mr. Rubin were part of at the last meeting, so was our Madam President who attended the meeting. There are several pertinent items, and I think I'm using the word several loosely. I think there are more than that. And so as we look at the reserve funds, then we also have to really try to consider the two areas, as you can see, that we indicated, which is the two sides where non-compliant with New York State and the compliance with New York State, and really determining what would be the best way to utilize these funds and not find ourselves, as our business official just indicated, in a deficit per se, but really in a position where it really did create something that was advantageous to the district.
Our 10 minutes are up, so could we have just one more question, and then if we want to extend discussion, we can. Mr. Rubin.
Really not a question. I just wanted to compliment Mrs. Crandall because I emailed her with a question at 10 o'clock at night. At 10:05, she had an answer back to me. So she was very good. Thank you.
Is there any need to extend discussion, or just very quick? Yes, Mrs. LaValle.
Is reserve for capital funds an option?
There are two types of reserve. One is a capital reserve, one is a repair reserve. I will provide the information. I did a big graph worksheet. I'll provide that again to the board with some further discussion, as well as where we have spent monies with regard to infrastructure and repairs to district infrastructure, as well as tax certs over the last few years. So the board can really make an informed decision as to how to allocate funds and how to move forward.
Okay, thank you. Okay. All right.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mrs. Crandall. Yes, Mr. Lumia.
Just for informational purposes, I think it's important for those who are interested in coming to the Capital Improvement Committee meeting, every Wednesday, every first Wednesday of the month, we meet at the district office at 10 o'clock. We've got several emails asking when the board meeting takes place or the committee meeting takes place. So I suggest you come to those particular meetings. You get very lot of information there.
Thank you. All right. The next item is student attendance and discipline. Board discussion. Mrs. Pelton.
Yes, in several past meetings, it's been brought up that there's concerns over the attendance policies that are currently existed in age-appropriate disciplines. In our code of conduct, there's no differentiation from the elementary schools to the high schools. And while we've all expressed concerns with different aspects of this, nothing has actually been articulated to have something move forward. So what I'd like to do is make a motion that the board resolve to have the code of conduct and the policy committee convene and provide recommendations to the board within a 6-week period.
Okay. Second?
Second.
Mr. Rubin? Discussion. All in favor? 8-0.
6 weeks.
Okay.
Thank you. All right, anything further on student attendance and discipline? All right. Policy committee member. Mr. Lumia tendered his resignation from the policy committee, and Mrs. Pelton has volunteered to be the third member of that committee. Is there anyone who would prefer to be the committee member, or is everyone perfectly happy?
I'm perfectly happy. I'll make the motion.
All right, thank you. Mr. Lumia.
Yes.
And seconded by Mr. Soma. All in favor? 8-0. Okay. All right, consent agenda. Is there anyone who would like to pull anything from the consent agenda? Mr. Rubin.
Just 7.05.
Anything else? Mr. Loomis.
7.02, number 13. Just number 13.
7.02, number 13. Okay. Anything else? All right. Consent agenda. Mr. Rubin, would you read it, please? And do we have an addendum, I believe, going there?
That's after the fact.
Resolve.
As amended, right.
Okay. Resolved that the Board of Education does hereby approve the following consent agenda items as stated. 7.02 with the exception of number 13. 7.03 as amended. 7.04. 7.06. 7.07. 7.08. 7.09. 7.10, 7.11, 7.12, 7.13, 7.14, 7.15, and 7.16.
Okay. Do we have a motion? Mr. Lumia, a second, Mr. Soma. Any discussion? All in favor? 8-0. Okay.
Okay, 7.02. Resolved that the,
Number 13, number 13.
but I have to read this, right?
Right.
Resolved that the Board of Education resolved that the reading of the support staff personnel list number, how do I write that, read
How
that?
do we say that?
Resolved that the reading of number 13 on the support, I'm not sure how to say that.
I don't know
I'm
either.
trying to get to it.
Okay, that's number
Resolve we
13.
approve all with the exception of number 13. With the exception of.
With the exception.
Resolve.
Resolved that the reading of the support staff personnel list, with the exception of number 13, be waived, and the resignations, leaves of absences, termination, tenure appointment, appointments, probationary appointments, change in hours, approval of part-time confidential employee, substitutes, no pay days, volunteers, and continuation of emergency conditional appointments be approved as recommended by the superintendent of schools.
Didn't we already approve that since we approved consent agenda except for 13?
That's why I wasn't sure how to say it.
Yeah, that's why I was wondering how we say it, because we already approved it with the exception of number 13.
Right, so what you'd
Okay.
like to do is take a vote on that particular
On
item.
particular
So
number 13.
the question would be for a board member to actually bring that back to the table
Mhm.
and then get the motion, and then after motion becomes resolution and a vote.
Yes, Mr. Lumia.
13.
Yes,
Want to bring back number 13?
yes.
Can someone point to number 13?
Okay, second,
Yes.
Mr. Rubin.
I just simply like to table that particular appointment.
So the question now is to motion, trustee Lumia made a motion, a board member needs to second that motion.
It was seconded by, yeah, okay, to table it. Is there a second to tabling it?
Well, wait, do we need to, is the second to discuss the tabling?
Can't discuss it.
No,
Tonight you can't discuss it.
table. The second to table.
Yes.
None?
I'll second.
Okay,
Second.
there is a second. Mr. Rubin? Okay, thank you.
Somebody needs to know.
All right, is there any discussion?
No discussion.
No discussion. We can't really discuss it. All those in favor of tabling it? Six? Six, all opposed to tabling it?
Moving to the vote.
Yes, but you have to have the negatives and the abstentions. Abstain, two abstentions, Mrs. Laval and Mrs. Carrasco. All right? Okay, so it was tabled. All right? Mr. Rubin.
Okay, 7.05. Resolved that the Board of Education does hereby authorize the superintendent of schools to sign the following consultant agreements as stated.
Okay, we have a motion?
Can I make the
Yes, Mr. Rubin. Second, Mr. Selma. Discussion? Mr. Rubin.
I asked to have this pulled, just so that we could have clarification. This was for AHA Heart Saver class in the amount of $660, being held at the on the superintendent's conference day. And I'm not objecting to this type of learning, but would like to know, can this class be given by, say, the American Red Cross? Has there been looking into that? Because I believe the Red Cross has similar classes that they may offer at no charge.
Mr. Zid?
If Forest Hill is straight together, I'm talking to one of the head nurses.
The phone. Can't hear it. The mic. Turn it on.
Look. Great. Once again, the training was put together, and consultation with the district nurses. They knew an individual who obviously works through just community college, can provide, also through the AHA, American Heart Association, Heart Safety class and first aid. Many of the district nurses feel that just given the time here too, some of those skills are a little bit rusty. Once again, it'd be a great refresher to have. I think we have about 20 nurses in the district. We're going to include the health PAs in this training also. Once again, it seemed like a good refresher to have in the district. The price seemed fairly nominal given the 4 hours and the number of individuals to be trained. So it just seemed reasonable, just given the constraints and the content.
Thank you. Any other question or discussion? All right, all those in favor? 8-0. Thank you. Old business. Dutchess County School Boards Association representative. Mrs. Pelton is unable to continue as our representative to the Dutchess County School Boards Association because of a conflict. And do we have volunteers who would like to do that? All right, Mrs. Karat and Mr. Rubin. So I think we have to have a vote to choose which one of the two will be our official representative. I would, however, like you to know that all school board members are welcome at every one of the meetings, can attend, and that the next meeting, Thursday, November 5th, will be discussing policy updating. So the members of the policy committee, if at all possible, are urged to attend, and everyone else can come if they want to. All right? All right, so we're going to be voting for either Mrs. Karat or Mr. Rubin, and I'll do it in alphabetical order, I guess. Okay, all those in favor of Mrs. Karat? Yeah, sure, go ahead.
No.
Okay, Mrs. Karat, Mrs. Laval, Dr. Rizzi, and Mrs. Gelman. All those in favor of Mr. Rubin? Okay, Mr. Selma, Mr. Lumia, Mrs. Pelton, and Mr. Rubin. Is it possible to have a dual representative? Lots of school boards just don't have an official representative to this.
I will change my vote to support Karen.
Thank you, Mr. Rubin. That's very kind, very courteous, and I hope you will continue to attend the meetings because, as I said, everyone is welcome to come, and they almost never have a vote except on the annual budget. So,
The only person who speaks at the meetings, that's Ms. Karat, correct?
Yes.
yes, she's the first. She gets, but actually, they let everybody go around the table. There aren't that many
She's the
people
only
come to
one
these
who will vote.
meetings. All right, thank you very much. Okay, new business, 9.01. Approval to attend the visit with Commissioner Elia. They're going to be having a special meeting with Commissioner Elia, the State Department of Education, with the superintendents, and then from 5 to 6 o'clock, she's going to be meeting with representatives of the school boards in Dutchess, Ulster, Orange, and I think Sullivan counties, and 3 members from each board, if they're a large board like ours, or 2 members if they're a little board of 5, are to be selected to attend. So, all those who would like to attend, please raise your hands. Okay. We have Mrs. Laval, Dr. Risby, Mr. Rubin, and Mr. Lumia. So again, since there are so many people who would like to go, I will defer and give them an opportunity. Since, yeah. So. Right. Well, Mr. Rubin was gracious to Mrs. Karat, and I should be gracious too, right? All right. Well, no, really, I think it's good to give different people the opportunity to do things and participate beyond our local board. All right. So I guess we each have 3 votes toward voting for people. So we'll mention the names again, and so just vote 3 times. And Mrs. Pedro will be keeping track. All right. All right. I guess again I'll do it. Shall I do it alphabetically? Does everybody think that's fair? Okay. Mrs. Laval. Okay. Mrs. Karat, Mrs. Laval, and Mrs. Kelland. Okay. Mr. Lumia. Mrs. Pelton, Mr. Rubin, Mrs. Kelland, Dr. Risby, Mr. Soma, and Mrs. Laval. Okay. What should we have?
Myself and Dr. Risby.
I was going alphabetically. Dr. Risby. Mr. Lumia, Mrs. Pelton, Mrs. Karat, Mr. Rubin, Mrs. Kelland, Dr. Risby, Mr. Soma, and Mrs. Laval. And Mr. Rubin. Mr. Lumia, Mrs. Pelton, Mrs. Karat, Mr. Rubin, Dr. Risby, Mr. Soma. Okay. Okay, and the results, Mrs. Pedro? Okay. Thank you. It was John Lumia, Dr. Risby, and Mr. Rubin. Thank you.
May I say something?
Yes, Mr. Lumia.
I think it's important for those who wanted to go to tell the individual people who are going to go there what your concerns are.
Yes.
I think it's extremely important that, I don't say just my views, but individual views. I would like to hear from anybody else, personally, in an email.
All right. The next thing is to adopt the Board of Education goals for 2015-2016 school year.
Resolved that the Board of Education of the Wappinger Central School District hereby adopts the goals drafted by the Board of Education for the 2015-16 school year as appended to the agenda.
All right. Do we have it to go? We had, this was discussed at the previous meeting, and Mr. Lokema led us in a little preference voting. Yes, and it's right here, and so everybody's going to see it. Right, yes, yep.
Yeah?
Hi.
Mr. Carrion.
Very quickly, the board goals, if you can remember when we discussed it during the workshop, we divided it into 3 categories, one being curriculum and instruction, the other being communications and fiscal. So all 3 of those items, as we reviewed the Board of Education goals that the board members submitted, what we looked at was really looking at those indicators to meet the goal. When we tallied the votes to see how you all voted, we took the top 3 indicators from each one of those categories and listed them. And on top, what you see is the overall goal, which reflects somewhat the work that was done with the former board when our trustee Colleen Hardiman took and then reworded the goals, but took the intent of the board. And this basically symbolizes that. What I shared with the board was that I took the liberty to also kind of align the workshop items that the Board of Education members voted for in terms of what's aligned to the different goals. And also to align the strategic plan, the end results that I recommended for the board to accept, which didn't require the vote, but also here you have a snapshot of what we look like as a district. And once these are approved, what we can do is continue to move forward. I can share the district goals, which are drafted already, the district action plan that supports these goals, And then the schools will continue. They started last year. We have some principals here who have worked with their staff to develop their action plans. Once we can articulate these goals and the goals are accepted by, approved tonight, if they will be approved, then that's how we will continue to move forward. If we go to the next page, you will see the financial, which also the three indicators, the top three indicators selected by the board. And the third page, which is communication, the top three indicators selected by the board. And also, as you can see to the right, all workshop items support communication. And the end results are in the product.
Okay. Any questions before we, okay. All right, could we have a motion to adopt the Board of Education goals? Oh, yes, wait, yes, we'll have a motion, second, and discussion? Okay. I just didn't, okay, Mrs. Karath, I think moved first, Mr. Selma seconded. All right, any discussion or questions about the goals? Yes, Mrs. LaValle.
Reviewing the results of the voting, the number one goal item was overall communication and response to concerns of community members and taxpayers. In my very strong opinion, these goals do not represent the concerns of the community. They represent concerns of board members. We're elected to represent the community. As you stated in your opening comments, the New York State School Board Association had a very significant modification to their number 2 resolution, which was looking at the assessments. We have 40 to 50% of students opting out. We have 60 to 70% of students being rated non-proficient, and we don't have a goal to look and see if our assessments, which our strategic plan are aligned to, are effective and if we're getting the results that we're looking at. So we set goals kind of in limbo because we don't really know, what our objective is or whether or not our objective is realistic. With regard to the cost goals, the cost of collecting the data, the teacher rating system, the cost of administering the assessments, the costs of remediation. I think all of these things are tremendous concerns of the community. They're obviously concerns across the state. The governor has appointed a committee to look at these concerns. There's potential that these items are going to change, and I think that the goals that the board is looking to adopt are very short-sighted in light of the big picture of what's going on across the state and in the district. And so I have very strong reservations about approving these as goals for the district.
Any other comments or questions? Mrs. Karan.
Mrs. LaValle, what did your first concern was, isn't it stated on the goal what the concern was, that we really work hard to communicate with the public, or did I misunderstand what your first concern was?
My concern is that we voted to respond to community concerns, but yet we're adopting goals that don't really seem to address the concerns of the community. So I don't think that we really are fulfilling the first goal that we voted for.
The number 1 goal that we all voted for is right there, though. To make it a board goal.
My concern is that the rest of the goals and the indicators to support the goal and the workshop items that we're adopting don't actually represent what the stated goal is. They don't support the stated goal, in my opinion.
Okay, thank you.
I do think that your concern about the costs of testing and assessment or remediation, I think that's covered under the first indicator in the financial goals that we identified federal, state.
Previous page.
Right. Right. The cost, identify the costs of mandates, so that everyone.
It was on the previous page.
Yeah, the previous page
Right there.
was up there
No,
about
no,
the
go back.
costs.
Go back,
Yes.
go back, right there.
Right. And the first indicator under financial is identify which costs are in our control and identify all mandates and associated costs, which is, of course, most of our budget. Any other comments or questions? All right, yes, Mr. Carrion.
Just quickly, I wasn't going to share this, but it's public information, so you can disaggregate and continue to disaggregate the data that came from the board members at the previous meeting. And one of the things I did was to really look at how the members were voting. And outside of 2 Board of Education members, where it was indicated where the top, there were only 3 items that were not, that did not make it into one of the indicators. So the reason why I'm sharing this is because the other members, there were from 9 to 13 items that there was a difference of opinion. So it's a data point to basically look at what people are prioritizing, and that two members basically only have 3 items that were not part of the entire board in terms of what would be the top priorities. Take the opportunity to look at that, because that's a strong data point to see where differences lie and what people are prioritizing. So that's just my recommendation to all of you as a public document. Thank you.
Any other comments? All right. All right, all those in favor? Mr. Lumia, Mrs. Pelton, Mrs. Carruth, Mr. Rubin, Mrs. Kellen, Dr. Risby, Mr. Soma. All those opposed? Mrs. Laval. Okay. All right, we're in receipt of financial reports for July and August 2015. So I hope that the entire board will look those over. And number 10, request for additions to the agenda. All right, Mrs. Laval is going to read for us. Thank you. Okay. Yes. Oh, wait a minute. We have something else?
You have
Well, that's what we do. We have a motion to add to the agenda. So I thought you were going to make the motion to add. She was going
I
to
will
read.
make I'll make a motion to have an item added to the agenda.
All right. Seconded by Mr. Soma. All right.
All in favor?
8-0. Okay.
Yeah.
Mrs. Laval.
A motion to approve commencement of litigation to recover security deposit from the landlord at Airport Drive.
A second, Mr. Lumia. All those in favor? 8-0. Are there any other additions to the agenda? All right. Do we have a motion to adjourn?
No.
Oh, whoops, oops, communications. Very sorry.
You're bad today.
I am. That's because they didn't comment at the beginning, and I forgot all about it. Okay. All right. Comments from the public. You have 30 minutes if people would like to talk. Anyone? Yes, Mr. Lumia.
I'll make a motion to adjourn.
Okay, Mr. Lumia moved to adjourn, and Mrs. Pelton seconded. All in favor? 8-0. Thank you.